All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Kent. I'm the Communications Director for the County Executive. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today. We'll have a pretty simple run. Nicole Darty will be giving us an overview of the case and telling the story. Then we have David Middleman from Ortham Inc., who will be providing sort of an overview of what they did with the genetic testing. And then Deb Stone, who will give a little bit of a background on the genealogy portion of the work. And then Nicole will be available to take questions at the end. We also have a whole bunch of family members here. If you see someone with a little pink strip on them, they would prefer not to be on camera, so hope you will adjust your lenses accordingly, but we do have family members who are happy to do interviews at the end, because this is a real positive story, and it's really their story about family that had a loss for over 4 decades, and now to have a conclusion to the story of their Uncle Adi, and at least now they know, Odie, and at least they now know where he is. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nicole.
Thanks, Kent. So I'm Nicole Darty. I'm the operations manager at the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office. I'm just going to go over a kind of overview of how this case came into our hands and where we got to where we are now. On July 23rd, 1980, a fly fisherman discovered human remains in the Stillaguamish River in Arlington. The death did not appear to be suspicious, and investigators initially thought it may be due to drowning. The following day after being found, Dr. Clayton Haberman performed an autopsy. He determined the decedent did not have any trauma. He also found no evidence of definitive drowning. There was, however, severe coronary artery disease present, which led him to classify the death with an undetermined manner and an apparently natural cause. Dr. Haberman determined the decedent to be a male, about 5'7", approximately 150 pounds, and gray-haired. He did not give an age estimate at that time. After being unable to identify the decedent, he was buried on August 15th, 1980 by Weller Funeral Home at the Arlington Cemetery. In 2008, Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Detective Jim Scharf with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office cold case team, along with retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Kauser, began re-examining old unsolved homicides and unidentified persons cases in the county. The improvement of DNA technologies gave them hope that exhuming unidentified bodies may lead to the collection of a useful DNA profile that could be used to identify the decedents, and they were right. In December 2017, the decedent was exhumed and nicknamed I-5 Stilly Doe. In May 2018, the Medical Examiner's Office entered the decedent into NamUs, and a forensic odontologist, Dr. Gary Bell, performed more postmortem dental charting. The comparisons with known missing persons were compared and unfortunately did not come back with a match. In September 2018, the late Dr. Kathy Taylor, who was the Washington State forensic anthropologist, performed an exam and estimated the decedent to be an adult male, approximately 5'5" to 5'9", and between 45 to 59 years old at the time of death, and that was an estimate. In September 2018, a section of the decedent's femur was sent to UNT in Texas for attempting to obtain a sample of DNA to upload to CODIS. Unfortunately, no matches were found as a result of this upload. From 2018 to 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner Office investigators, mainly Jane Jorgensen, ruled out numerous reported missing persons via circumstances, DNA comparisons, and dental comparisons. In 2021, the Medical Examiner's Office began collaborating with Ortham to obtain advanced DNA profiles suitable for genetic genealogy. DNAsolves.com fully funded the laboratory work by Ortham in this case. In July 2021, Ortham successfully obtained a DNA sample that was suitable after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. The Medical Examiner's Office uploaded this profile to GEDmatch, where a couple of very distant matches were identified in the 5th to 7th cousin range. This allowed Deb Stone with Kin Forensics to begin investigating through genetic genealogy. In May 2022, the Ortham DNA profile was uploaded to Family Tree DNA, and low-level matches were once again found, but they were different from the ones found through GEDmatch, which allowed Deb to triangulate the different matches and build additional trees back to a common ancestor. Deb Stone identified a possible set of great-great-great-grandparents to a match who had descendants in the state. Deb then spoke with a relative who mentioned an uncle, Othaniel Philip Ames, who went missing from Arlington in 1980 at the age of 82. This was shocking, as the age estimate of the decedent was 45 to 59 years old. However, that was just an estimate. Othaniel, he either was not reported missing or he was, and his records may have been lost. His granddaughter agreed to DNA testing, and that was the piece that we used to confirm this I-5 Steely Doe was indeed Othaniel. Othaniel moved to Washington in 1951 with his wife and children. He worked at a paper mill and had a small dairy farm in Arlington. He was also a woodworker and a winemaker. In the early 1960s, Othaniel and his wife separated. After that, Othaniel moved to a small cabin in the woods in Arlington. He was last known alive in the early 1980s after telling family that he would be traveling to California and Oregon. On September 29th, 2022, Dr. J. Matthew Lacey officially identified I-5 Steely Doe as Othaniel Philip Ames. And we would like to thank, among many others, Deb Stone, Othram, GEDmatch and Verigene, Family Tree DNA, and most of all, Othaniel's relatives for helping solve this case. And so I am going to pass it off to David Middleman with Othram.
I appreciate you all having us here. I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, we've been in a long-term partnership with Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and Medical Examiner's Office, looking at a number of cases over the last few years of folks that have not been identified. And it's been an absolute pleasure working with Detective Jim Scharf, Jane Jorgensen, and all the fine folks that have worked hard to figure out who all these unidentified are. I think it's important for everyone to know there are so many more of these unidentified persons, probably tens of thousands to maybe more than 100,000 in the US alone, that have never been connected to a name, to a family. And we have technology now that works. We have technology that robustly and routinely can identify these folks. I also wanted to emphasize the point that this case, not all these cases have funding available to them. There's a complex budgetary process and grant process required to secure the funding necessary to do all the work that everyone has to do. And there's a lot of people that do a lot of things. And so again, wanted to share enthusiasm for DNAsolves.com and the community of folks that rally around any number of these cases. And at any given time, we have 10, 20 cases that are in our queue, solvable and ready to go, but just waiting for funding. So we're always grateful to those that participate. Othram operates a forensic lab that builds DNA profiles. Our profiles are a lot more comprehensive than the typical forensic profiles. Whereas a normal profile consists of about 10 to 20 markers, we're looking at profiles that have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of markers, and they can be used with advanced techniques such as genetic genealogy to help identify distant relatives and bring folks home, as was done in this case. And there's always an element of challenge for the older cases, such as this one, in trying to work with challenging forensic DNA inputs, DNA that's imperfect, that's aged over time and requires lots of iteration. But a lot of the times the complexity is, you can describe the complexity of a case as being in building the profile, whereas in doing the genealogy. This case was a combination of both. There was some particularly interesting challenges in trying to be able to build a DNA profile from an old case and from evidence that was as challenging as was in this case. But as you heard, also tremendous work on Deb's part to really sort out relationships from what are distant, almost seems too nice, extremely distant relatives to the person that was unidentified. And with that, I'll turn that over to Deb.
Well, it's really great to be here and to be working again with Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office. We've done a number of cases together. The main thing I wanted to say is to really just give a shout out to the unsung heroes that are the people that upload their commercial test DNA to these sites that allow us to solve these cases. Without them, this genetic genealogy work that we do would really not be possible. And the second people I really want to thank are the people that when we call are willing to share their family trees or test for us or upload their DNA so that we can get closer to the unidentified individual. So my condolences to the family. I'm happy he's home with all of you, and I thank you for your assistance in resolving this case.
And you might need to repeat the questions for them if any.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you, Deb and David. Okay, so thank you for everyone for coming, and especially for Nathaniel's family. It's very, very great for you guys to be here. At this point, we'll take any questions.
I have a question for David. You mentioned the funding. Can you elaborate a little bit on where, if there's a need for funding, where that need is? Is it a county level thing? Is there funding from the state? Is it the federal government or locals?
Okay, so David.
It's an interesting question. So there are, I think everything begins at the federal level. There is money available, for DNA testing and backlog reduction and other kinds of capacities. There's perhaps people have heard of the Sex Assault Initiative, SAKI funding. It's important that there's funding that's spelled out for the unidentified as well. Right now, there's a national initiative called NamUs, which catalogs all these cases, including this one, and it needs the proper funding to do more than just catalog the cases, but also perform the testing with firms such as Optum to go figure out who these folks are. So there's definitely an element at the federal level. There's also, state level opportunities for, and even at the county level, for folks to look at their budgets and figure out where and how they deploy funding. I think a lot of the times funding is available. I think it's important though, as this technology is new and not always accounted for, to make sure it gets included in a budget or that money is specifically set aside for this technique. There are a lot of ways to process forensic evidence, and this is one of the newer ones. And so I just think advocating is what we do, advocating every time there's a successful identification to include these kind of technologies in the budget when all other methods fail, to advocate that the federal government, track the success of these methods and then continue to fund them appropriately. That's all important. And until we get to that point where this is uniformly supported and funded throughout the US, we do the best we can do through advocacy, philanthropy, and even crowdfunding.
And then just a quick follow-up. What are you doing, or what is the industry perhaps doing to, for PR, I guess, to really get the word out to not just the law enforcement agencies around the country and the state, but also the average person who maybe still has privacy concerns about uploading their samples and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Honestly, I think the best validation of the work that we do is, and the work that everyone here did today, is these press conferences, the stories that all of you write. The stories that all of you write are the advocacy, because you're highlighting instances in which someone who is not identified for decades all of a sudden gets identified. And there was important laboratory work and genealogical work, but at the end of the day, budget played a big role in a lot of these cases in getting them off the ground. And so I think every time any one of you write a story on this, it excites folks. And then, there's obviously more to it than that. As Deb noted, there's obviously the generosity of folks that will opt in or help with their profiles to solve the next case. That's great as well. We prefer to highlight the power of what this method can do in solving crimes and identifying the unidentified. And then if people feel comfortable, of course, we're just eternally grateful anytime they share their information. But I think that there's not much more that needs to be done than just to keep spreading the word and showing people this is not an extraordinary event. In fact, it's really almost an ordinary event. It's the consequence of putting some smart folks together, hardworking investigators, and then a little bit of funding to make it all happen. So I would hope this becomes a very routine technique in the next few years. And you can kind of see, just following along in Snohomish County, just over the last couple of years, just the near emptying of the entire backlog of the unidentified. I think it's a wonderful story.
David,
Can you speak? Oh.
how much are we talking here? What does it take to solve one case, fiscally speaking?
Well, there's a lot of costs and a lot of pieces to this, but the work that Optum does, for example, and this is going to be taking evidence and producing from that a profile. That's going to be something that's in the low thousands of dollars, generally within $5,000. but there's of course additional costs associated with investigators that have to follow up in leads and genealogists that do the research, and so there's costs around that. But the point is, I don't think it's cost prohibitive, and the way I like to think about it is, I mean, certainly if you compare the work that we do against other forensic techniques, it's not that expensive. And then I like to consider things from the perspective of dollar per solve, right? So the dollar per solve using our approach is pennies on the dollars to most approaches. I mean, you can't draw facial reconstructions of someone for free, and you can't do dental workups and searches for free. Everything we do costs money, and I think that perhaps, especially for the unidentified, the work that we're doing with forensic genetic genealogy may be some of the most cost-effective, dollar per solve work that you can do. You can imagine what it would cost just to employ a handful of investigators for a month, and probably spend more than the entire budget of one of these cases.
And just a quick second question. Did this case being 30 years old, did it prove more difficult than, say, like a case that you're trying to solve a month ago, weeks ago? How does that change?
The age of a case is challenging. I will tell you, just so you know, at Othram we help identify someone from 1881. So I mean, we've worked with cases that are in excess of a century old. But older cases are trickier, and then it just matters. The circumstances matter. I mean, where the person was found, what condition. I mean, there's so many things that can happen, and then how that evidence was stored over time. So this case was challenging in that it just a lot of the pieces of this case, the age being just one of them, made it very hard to get usable DNA. And that's really the challenge. Is like, can you get enough usable DNA to build that profile? Because if you don't have the profile, then it really blocks you from doing efficient or even sometimes at all any genealogy or further along investigative work.
This this question is for Deb. I know in this it said that you found a matching set of great grandparents. What is that like for you on a personal level to go back all these years? We're talking about entire ancestors of people and solve this puzzle piece.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Just what is that like to go back? We're talking about great grandparents here that you were able to kind of identify and solve this mystery. What is that like for you to go back and take a look at people's ancestors and solve this whole puzzle based on a century ago, if not more?
Yeah, I mean, it's very gratifying work, and when you're working with really low matches, the tree can become so large it's quite unwieldy, and so there can be a lot of diagramming and stuff that happens. But to give you an example, this tree had 12,000 people in it that were all related to each other in one another way. And once I was able to identify those great grandparents and have someone upload their DNA, I was able to reduce the number of people I need to look at to about 100 people. So you can see, like, when you're working with such low matches, it's like a haystack. And then when you get better matches or more people upload and we have better matches, it's less time consuming. So yeah, it's very, very gratifying to get to the answer of the puzzle when it's that large of a puzzle.
I have a question about the autopsy.
Sure.
I'm a member of the extended family. Originally, the family was told that there were no signs of drowning, but you said that there were.
No, I'm sorry. The investigators, when they first discovered the body, initially thought it may be due to drowning. However, during the autopsy, he found no evidence of drowning.
Oh, no evidence?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and you had originally said that he was last seen alive in the early 1980s, but the body itself was found in 1980. So I'm just trying to.
Yeah, he was last seen early in the year of 1980, and then
Okay.
found in July.
Okay, so then it wouldn't have been too long after he died either, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And he had probably been exposed to the elements for some months
Yeah.
before being found.
Yeah, I believe so.
And, I think it was probably later in 1980 that he disappeared, because he was at our house, and I know it was either spring or early summer.
Mm-hmm. So sometime probably like June or before.
Yeah, I know the weather was nice. That's all I remember about it.
Sometime early-ish, 1980.
How many cases like this have you guys been able to solve through DNA testing?
We've done about, is it 11? Jane? Yeah, I think around 11, because I think we started out, 15, and we have about 4 left, so I think 11.
You have 4 active ones left that are still working.
Yeah.
Is Detective Sharp still working on those as well?
I believe so. I think he's in the volunteer kind of position now, but I believe he is still working on them.
He's retired, right?
Yes, correct, yeah.
We have some members of the family that would be willing to speak with us.
Yeah.
Diane Ames, I believe you were willing to chat. Do you want to hop up here real quick? And also, I have a quick question for the family. The remains were brought here. Are there some family members, are you willing to sort of have them take some photos and videos with a few of you holding that?
Yes.
Just sort of honor him? Would you like to do that now? And
I'm
then
off the
Diane, you
Bible
can come
that
up
was signed over in early 1980,
Oh, really?
like he gave away the Bible.
So do some of the family members want to come up and just sort of take a moment to?
No, you bought a Bible, it's given to your.
You're the closest.
What's it like to be holding that right now after all these years, all this time?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What's it like to be holding this after all these years?
I'll tell you, it's a very big relief.
His name on it.
It's closure for the family. He was my father-in-law and became estranged from the family sort of over the years. And my children, my son Doug and my daughter Diane, my other daughter couldn't be here. I hundreds of times over the years. My husband died in 2008. And many times over the years, I just wondered what happened to him. And this has finally brought closure. And like my son said, this is, is good for our family.
I'm gonna ask you, did you ever think that this day would come? It's been 42 years.
No.
Farthest thing.
No, I mean, and that's why it bothered me so much, because I wondered over the years, whatever happened to him, I hope he didn't suffer, I hope he didn't, yeah, it's hard to know, you just don't know what happened.
What do you think of the process of the way that they were able to make this identification?
Just amazing.
Fascinating.
Because my older daughter, she's the one that got her DNA done, and it matched. And just by chance, the Ariones family, I guess, I don't know how she got notified or how they found her phone number from your families, I don't know.
Can you tell us a little
From
bit?
Kay, yeah. And otherwise, if they'd had my sons, maybe they would have had him take the DNA, which might have been closer, I don't know. But nobody had our numbers. We had moved over the years, We used to live in Seattle when he disappeared, and moved to Stanwood, and now I'm in Tacoma. But it's like he's come home.
Can you tell us a little bit about what type of person he was, what type of man he was?
Pardon me?
Can you walk us through what type of man Odie was? What type of person was he?
Well, I didn't know him for very many years. My husband and I got married in 1959, and we knew him for about 5 years, and then his wife and him separated and sold the farm, and we kind of lost touch with him. My husband and I were the type that our families just didn't talk about things that were going on, and we really never knew. His wife, Lydia, their grandmother, she lived with us for a period of time, and then she had a massive stroke and was in a nursing home for about 12 years in Seattle. And they had a lot of tragedies in their lives. When they were living out in Arlington, their next to oldest daughter and her family were on their way home from her 10th class reunion, and they got hit by a car, and she was killed and 2 of their children, so they lost a daughter and two grandchildren. then, and then their other son, besides my husband, he died in a car, burning car in 1969, I believe it was. And so they had a lot of tragedies in their family. And after that, we just kind of lost touch, and I don't really know much about.
You said,
The Ariana's family did know more. They'd seen, I think they'd been to his cabin, is that correct? Yeah, so,
you said even though you're estranged, you said that you always wondered what happened.
oh, yes, I mean, I didn't ask a lot of questions of my husband. I think it had bothered him over the years, but he just never was able to bring it up.
What would go through your mind? I mean, what would you wonder?
Why? Why? You know, just, yeah.
Where he was.
I wonder, yeah, where he went,
Did he
where
take off and
he
go to
spent his
California?
final years.
Yeah.
Did it ever occur to you when this person was found in 1980, I wonder if this is Odie?
We did not know, and that's the ironic thing about the whole case, is that I grew up in Savannah. This is where he was found, in Savannah, and still at Warmish River. We moved away, got married and moved away. We were in Seattle 24 years when my husband and I, his son, retired. We moved back out to Savannah in 1992. We didn't know about finding this body. The person that found it, I know very well. After we moved back to Savannah, I picked blueberries at their farm one summer, and they go to the same church that we attended there for the whole years that we were there. I still know them very well.
And you never, that's incredible.
I
You never knew that
no,
there was this link.
No, it's come full circle. It's come full circle. And
When you discovered this link, what went through your mind? I mean, that you know the person.
it's amazing. I mean, when I read that article, I hadn't read it till I went to Alice's 105th birthday party over in Bremerton. I read that article they had. I grabbed myself and I said, oh my God, Spencer, he was a teenager. He's now in his 50s. He has three lovely children that I've known and watched grow up.
So once I found out from my mother, I immediately, I took off work and the next day, and then I went down and I talked with Spencer and his wife Karen. And that was actually on the farm where he was found.
In the river.
In the river, yeah.
they're
Same
very
farm,
fond.
same family.
They're
What
very
was that like?
fond.
To thank him and, say we've got closure.
Well,
But also for him.
Yeah, Spencer had found him when he was a teenager. So he asked Doug, well, why are you asking these questions?
Mhm.
Doug says, well, he was my grandpa.
He said, you mean Walt's father? That was my dad. So, yes.
Was he a hiker or fisherman, or any idea what he was doing, where he was found?
Yeah.
No?
What did Spencer tell you about how the body was found and what happened that day?
He didn't talk a lot about it. He said it's still very vivid. I think the previous article that came out explained a lot about pretty much what he said. He was wondering why I was asking. And his jaw dropped, and it was just absolute amazement for everybody.
What are your plans to do with Odie now?
Well, my first impression was that I had him brought to the funeral home in Stanwood, where my family is all buried up at Savannah in one of the cemeteries there, and I thought I'd bury him next to my husband and where I would be buried. But then I thought, well, maybe, being his ashes, maybe he would rather have them, and I thought I'd have talked to the Arionis family because they had seen him more recently than we had. Maybe he'd rather be spread back in South Dakota where they came from, whatever. So we haven't made the final decision yet, but we have the ashes.
More than welcome to stay with me in my life for as long.
What would you say to the people, I think it was your daughter or one of your relatives who had put their their DNA up in the sample that was able to help to track. What
Well,
would you-
she was called by
Okay.
Jane Jurgensen to submit, one of the family to submit that, and she was more than happy to, and I didn't think much of it. I thought, oh, no, how would that be, but it just all.
What would you say to people who are on the fence about uploading their DNA to those type
Oh.
of sites?
It's just, it brings closure to our family. Our children didn't really know their grandpa. But I have a couple pictures of him, but, yeah.
I say do it.
Yeah.
This wouldn't have happened
Yeah,
if
right.
people weren't willing to do that.
And I have always wondered what happened.
I'll ask you this, what was your reaction? You get the phone call that they've made a positive ID on this guy, family member that you've always wondered what happened to him. What was it like for you in that moment?
Relief, I guess. Yeah, relief. Just of knowing, because, you go on and then, of course, then you think, what if? What if? What if I had done this? What if I had asked my husband? What if I had, you just don't know.
How much of it how shocking was it?
Yeah, it was shocking.
Very overwhelming to try to
Overwhelming.
put together how it came to this, to us hearing about it. And I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
And honestly, I haven't really known how to feel about this because I never knew him. And it's been really strange to have a blood relative that close that I never knew. So he's always been a mystery. But then to have no idea where he was, if he was dead, and then to have all of this come through, this amazing technology. It's been fascinating.
Did he have a house or any assets or anything like that? And then, if so, how were they dispersed? When he went missing, I should specify.
I think the Arianasis can also speak more to that.
Yeah,
if you want to.
Okay?
Legend has it that he had given his car to Diane sometime in 1980, she thinks. His house, legend has it, that he gave his house to a nursing student. Family believes she may have been a neighbor, a nursing student. I would love to know what reason he had given her as to why he was signing over his house to her. That we don't know, but I would love to know who she is and what the backstory is on that. She no longer owns the house. I've done enough research that it was sold quite a few years ago, and the current family has had it for now a long time.
Have you talked to her or reached out?
No, I thought about, but no, I never did contact anybody that has any connection to that house. January 8th of 1980, he gave me this Bible. I don't remember how I actually received it into my hands. I was already married at that time, and I don't think I ever saw him once I was married, and that was in '75. I'm guessing he must have given it to my mom to give to me, but again, I don't know how I actually got it into my hands. And I had no memory of that until I had been speaking to Deb Stone by the encouragement of my daughter, who I don't normally call back people I don't know. He made this candle holder, gave it to me in 3/14 of '69, so I was 11 years old when he gave that to me, but that was made by his own hands, so we know he loved woodworking.
You sound like you'd welcome more information.
I
So
would,
if
yes.
that nurse heard this
Yes.
or anyone who might.
Yes, the woman that he gave his phone to, I'd love to know what that backstory
I'm
is.
sorry, I missed your name.
Kay Thomas.
And what's your relation again?
I'm his great niece. My father was his nephew.
Going way back.
Big
Way
man.
back, yeah.
He was a brother to our grandmother.
He used to show up unannounced twice a year in the fall and the spring. He'd stay for the weekend, and I was a kid then, I just remember that, oh, you know, it's some old guy telling a lot of stories. And I tried not to be around for a lot of it.
Do you have a favorite story of his that?
No, I don't.
Despite not having any stories, you still remember how important are these items now that you know more of them?
They're much more important now, yeah. Yeah. The Bible had originally been owned by a man who received it from a Lakeside Baptist church in Oakland, California, who died in December of 1968, and he gave this, and Odie received it in December of 68. So apparently he knew the original owner of this little Bible and then gave it to me 12 years later in almost 12 years later in 1980. So yeah, sometime between then and July is when he disappeared, and it sounds like he had been in the water for quite some time, so I'm thinking spring. Somebody said that there had been a lot of rain that spring. I'm thinking if he had sat under a tree or something, had a heart attack, whatever, he may have been slipped down into the river from there, is my guess.
So my mom and the genealogists were the ones that
Cracked the case.
I was there when my mom listened to the voicemail. I was like, oh, you gotta call her back. That sounds so intriguing, John Doe. Call back. And she did, and I sat there listening to both of them solve the mystery.
Yeah, it was after.
And then it was the next day. And it was the next day she finds that, we're piecing together all the pieces, calling family, getting more pieces. She pulls this out. She's like, oh, look what I just found. And you almost can't make out the year. And I'm like, I swear, Mom, if that says like 79 or 80. And then I'm like, Mom, that says 1980. He gave that to you the year that's way. So I was like, this story just keeps getting more interesting.
So when they first contacted, nobody was home to receive the call? It was a voicemail that you
It was,
responded to?
yeah, we were screening calls.
So when
I
you
heard
played
the
that-
message and she said, call her back, and so I did.
When you played that, were you incredulous? Were you excited?
Yeah, it
Think
wasn't
it's a scam?
until I was talking to Deb Stone for a while that I started remembering, oh, I did have a relative in Arlington, and I assumed somehow that he had gone to visit relatives in another state, and really never thought more about it. And then I remembered, I think I have a Bible that from a distant relative, and I knew exactly where it was and pulled it out, and sure enough, it
Where
was
was it
from
located?
him. It was downstairs in a sewing room
Okay.
on a bookshelf.
Do you remember what you were doing that day when you came home and played that message? Was it just a normal day, or were you just going?
I had just gotten home from work, and
Oh.
I was there when she called, but I was screening the calls.
Have all of you now uploaded your own DNA to GEDmatch and places like that?
Well, she already was, and that's how they
Yeah.
called her, actually.
It was a distant relative that lives in Puyallup that Deb Stone had talked to that gave her my number. We had met once a few years
Through
ago.
genealogy.
Through genealogy.
So big proponent you are.
Yeah, so, and that was through Ancestry, which I guess they don't have access to the Ancestry
Right.
links, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was this other distant relative. And she was gonna be here today, but she had a bad cold.
I will say, in screening the call, I think it was running through everyone's mind, wondering, is this a scam? Call this sort of phone call back. Deb Stone sounded to me very genuine, like the type of person that's really calling about something very personal, not just your run-of-the-mill solicitor, and that's call her back.
Yeah.
And what's your name?
Bonnie Thomas.
And this is your mom?
Yes.
And so Odie would be your what?
Great, great, great.
Two
Great,
distant.
Google.
great niece.
So when you went through that and heard that message, was Odie at the top of your mind at all? Or
No, and it wasn't until we were talking for quite a while before I realized I did have a relative in Arlington that, 40 years had gone by, and
Right.
But you had to go, like, he wasn't someone you thought of very often.
No,
At
not
the
really.
beginning of the
'cause I
phone
was-
call, my mom literally said, I don't know why you'd be call. I definitely don't have a relative that went missing around that time. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm
Wow.
like, except Uncle Odie apparently.
So now, being a kid at the time, my views were on my friends and whatnot, and I didn't, distant relatives weren't
Sure.
top in my radar. But yes, it was quite amazing to do all this.
The family must be very,
Yeah, my sisters had a lot more of the pieces of the story that I didn't know, so they were pretty instrumental in, like, gave her the car and.
yeah.
The rest of the family was closer in touch with him before he passed away.
The article in 2017 mentioned that he had been found in long underwear, and Nancy remembered that year-round, he would wear his thermal underwear. Yeah.
All this and all that.
I remember